Good evening and welcome back to the Savvy Street Show. Today is podcast 8, the last one in the series Controversies in Libertarianism. Once again, we have the eminent economist and libertarian legend, Walter Block. Welcome to the show, Walter.
Thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. And we also have my co-host with whom I keep switching hats. They are invisible. And today he is an esteemed guest and co-author of the book Modernizing Aristotle's Ethics with me. Welcome to the show, Roger Bissell.
Good to be back here again with both of you.
Thank you. And we are going to jump on to question 1. Our topic is quite difficult today. We're talking about things that are not normally talked about in libertarianism. Polygamy, birth rates, is marriage only a contract or an institution, and so on. So, first question, I'll direct it to Walter. Can consensual polygamy among consenting adults be unlibertarian in any way? And if your answer is no, why is it that polygamy has been typically kosher in only primitive and authoritarian societies, but not in the so-called civilized advanced industrial economies? Over to you.
Let me try to address the last question first, which I think is relatively unimportant. The first question I think is much more important and more interesting, at least to me. Why do we have polygamy in historical times or many years ago and not now? I think because things were much rougher then and there were fewer men because the men were killing each other. And therefore, if you had very few men and a whole bunch of women, polygamy makes some sort of sense. It's interesting that in China, when they had the one-child policy for many years, and a lot of people chose boys. And now in China, my understanding is you almost have polyandry. I don't know if they had polyandry, but they have so many males and so few females that one would think that polyandry, namely one wife and 5 husbands, would be okay. But I want to address the other question and broaden it a little bit. Yes, I think that polygamy is perfectly compatible with libertarianism, because to me, libertarianism means anything between consenting adults, and we're talking about consenting adults. And if one man wants to have 5 wives or 10 or whatever, and they all agree, fine. And polyandry, namely if one woman wants to have 5 or 10 husbands and they all agree, again, fine. Now, there was this book, a very, very libertarian book, Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. If you haven't read that book and you're a libertarian, you're missing out. It's a magnificent book. And there he had neither polyandry nor polygamy. He had group marriage. And maybe there would be 5 women and 7 men, or 8 men and 4 women, or various combinations. And that seems eminently reasonable to me. Also, gay marriages or lesbian marriages. And it could be 4 or 5 gay men or 6 or 7 lesbian women having a marriage. It need not be always two. Now, the much more interesting and controversial issue is, what about incest? Suppose you have a brother and a sister, or a mother and a son, or whatever. And I'm going to step out on a limb, and this probably won't play in Peoria, as they say, but I would say that they are violating no libertarian law. Now, I personally I'm not gay. I have one wife. I don't want to be in any of these things, but that's a different issue, my own personal taste. We're not discussing my own personal taste now. We're discussing, should you go to jail? Because that's the only question that libertarians ask. Are you violating rights? You should go to jail. Well, are you violating rights if you agree to engage in any of these groups? And I say you're not violating the law, so they should all be legal. Whether they're all moral is a very different issue, but libertarianism doesn't concern itself with morality. It does concern itself with morality, but only a small slice of morality, namely legality. what should be the law, what should be legal. And I say that my interpretation, my understanding of libertarianism is that anything goes between consenting adults.
Okay, before I turn to Roger, I wanted to add that one thing that you said, the group marriage. I had expressed that almost in an article, marriage every which way, any which way. And that upset the other Walter Donway so much he threatened to resign from Savvy Street. This is when gay marriage was being legalized and all that. And I did give him an example even of a brother and sister cohabiting, not necessarily incest, who said there should be sex within marriage. But that was because the USA has laws which benefit married couples. So might as well anyone take the advantage of tax laws. So over to Roger, the same question with the any which way, every which way marriage added on.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part of that.
With this any which way, every which way, is also added on into the discussion. The group marriage, hippie marriage.
Yeah. I shudder at the thought for myself of polygamy, of having more than one wife. I tried having more than one girlfriend when I was younger, and that never turned out well. It never turned out well. And some of the young ladies involved are still around, so I won't say anything more about that. But anyway, I don't think there's anything inherent in polygamy or in marriage in general that has to result in somebody's rights being violated. And to me, that's the definition of anti-libertarian. Anytime that you voluntarily interact with other people, someone might step on somebody else's toes. Consenting adults aren't immune to aggression, but we're not unavoidably at risk either. You kind of have to place your money and take your bet, or however they say that. There are bad people everywhere, and you kind of have to use your discretion. Sometimes you have to live and learn. But are there risks? See that we address whether it should be legal or moral, but there's another issue of whether it's prudent. Are there risks involved that you don't have in two-spouse marriages? Well, I'd say, yeah, to some extent, just like in corporations with multiple corporate partners as opposed to a two-person partnership. But there's no guarantees either way. You might have a great corporate thing and a lousy two-person partnership, right? Or vice versa. Or everything is good or nothing's good. Maybe you're not cut out for marriage, or maybe you're cut out for a certain kind of marriage. The main problems with plural arrangements when something goes wrong is it's harder to work it out in court. It's more tangled, and more moving parts, as they say. But as long as people can come and go freely, there's nothing inherently anti-libertarian. It really depends on what people actually do to each other, not what kind of arrangement they have. And I know there are libertarians who have a broader view of what is unlibertarian. We touched on this several weeks ago. Some people think that corporations are inherently oppressive and the nuclear family is inherently oppressive because somebody's going to be boss. The man at the top or the woman at the top calls the shots. Everybody else submits and gets bossed around. And, oh, this is tyrannical, right? Well, this can happen in corporations and plural marriages, but it can happen in a marriage partnership too. And usually it's the man is the boss, but sometimes the woman wears the pants in the family. And that, that happened in Ayn Rand's, I think, in her marriage. She made all the income. Her husband, Frank, was basically just a homemaker and a companion. Fair enough. But when it came to Rand thinking, hey, maybe an outside romantic relationship would be just fine, and she pressured her husband and the guy's wife, who was her best friend, hey, we want to do this, okay? And I know that there must have been some kind of at least intellectual pressure and intimidation, like, well, we are very rational and surely you must approve of this. Well, I think that's similar to what happens in some of the male-dominated plural marriages like they have in that one branch of the Mormon church, right? And and is it anti-libertarian? Well, I don't see by the definition we all go by, no. Now, can it be inhumane or sociopathic? Well, Yeah, but there are sociopaths all around us, and most of them don't engage in aggression. They don't break the law. They don't violate our rights. They might make our lives more miserable at times than they should. But people need to take responsibility and be adults and try to be careful what they're getting into and not just jump into it and say and treat it like it's a frolic. Marriage is a more serious deal. It's not just dating, or it shouldn't be just dating. You're serious. Now, my wife has studied various cultures. She says when a polygamous married woman, Mormon woman, has children and she's abused by her husband, she's threatened that if she reports them to the authorities, the children will be taken away. So that's kind of blackmail. And polygamy is currently illegal. So that it's really tough to fight against that because a woman is kind of between a rock and a hard place. She's trapped. And so she's trapped into going along with the abuse because otherwise she might lose her kids. But that is unlibertarian, but I don't know that that's typical. Maybe it is typical. I'm glad I don't know the situations well enough to be able to say. I just know that my wife has studied it and she's paid a lot more attention to it than I have, and she knows that some women have a really difficult time and that it borders on rights violation. But in general, no, I'm with Walter. Whatever floats your boat.
Okay. I just want to clear the definitions here. Polyandry, one woman, many husbands. Polygyny, one man, many wives. And polygamy is the both included. So we don't have to specify which one it is. If it's polygamy, many spouses and one individual. I have a division of duties in my house. My wife is the boss of the kitchen and of the bedroom, and I'm the boss of the living room and particularly of the TV remote. I can't let it go. That's in my hands. Coming back to the marital contract. Now, Ayn Rand said she believed in the institution of marriage, and I'm not
Yes.
so clear on what she meant by that, because there is a contract, but at least in Australia, the family law court intervenes in the contract, very often disregards prenups. So if we just had a contract, you can have 3 women, 1 man, 2 men, 6 women, whatever. It's just a contract. You can have what if it breaks up? It's like a partnership. In a legal partnership, they always specify what happens if we break up, who gets what.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they still fight. So shouldn't the marital contract itself be like any other contract, outside the scope of government, not outside the scope of the courts, if you have an alleged breach of contract? So over to Roger first this time, because he might know what Ayn Rand meant.
Sure. I think what you said is exactly the way I look at it. Marriage contracts are parallel to business contracts. I don't think government should be trying to impose moral behavior on spouses or corporate officers other than keep their agreements and pay a penalty or so on for if they don't do so. I think that some of the grounds for divorce should be stripped out of the marriage laws. I mean, it should be just incompatibility. If you're incompatible, okay, we're out of here. As far as Rand, what she said, you'll like this. If you haven't heard her interview with Mike Wallace from 1959, I will quote her. Marriage, quote, should be treated like a business deal. So there you are. And what she meant was people are coming together on the basis of mutual interest and they're trading values. And so you would think, though, that if you're marrying someone as opposed to just hanging out with them, they would be kind of your highest value, and yeah, this person is really it for me, and there'd be love and respect. But there are marriages of convenience. There are marriages of companionship, and you know, as far as what marriage that Rand actually had with Frank O'Connor, maybe it varied from time to time. I don't know. But the fact that she had that relationship with her protege, maybe that suggests Frank wasn't always her highest value, or maybe she just didn't put such a premium on marital faithfulness, fidelity, as some other people would. And really, your contract or your agreement is between the two of you. And I know in some states, in the old days anyway, they would legally punish infidelity. I don't know if this is done very much anymore. I hope not. But there are, if people want some background on this, if they're morbidly curious, and for me, that was like 40 years ago, I satisfied my morbid curiosity. But Barbara Brandon has a biography of Rand called The Passion of Ayn Rand. There's even a movie about it. And Nathaniel Brandon wrote about it also, Judgment Day. And you'll get all you'd ever want to read about it. If you want to hear the other side, James Valiant wrote a book called The Passion of Ayn Rand's Critics. And I would buy a used copy and dispose of it discreetly after reading. But anyway, um, uh, she had a rather interesting, perhaps unconventional view of marriage.
Okay, Walter, over to you. Should it just be like any other contract?
Yeah, I agree with Roger on that. I wanted to do the counterpart to what Vinay said about he's the boss of the living room and the wife is the boss of the kitchen. Well, I've been with my wife for 55 years. I think
Wow.
that's a long time. And we're still together. And my wife is in charge of everything except two things. She wants me to retire, and I don't want to retire. And also, she's not a libertarian, and I'm not giving up libertarianism. But everything else, should I get a haircut, not a haircut, what should I wear, everything. What should we eat? Where should we go? She's in charge of everything. And
Me too, but I've hung on to the TV remote.
Oh no, she's in charge of that in my marriage. But I wanted to take up one thing that Roger said, and I don't know if he meant it seriously or was just a slip of the tongue, but I want to correct it. And what he said, if I can put words in his mouth, was that some women, especially Mormon women of a certain sect that still carries on with polygamy, feel blackmailed. I think the proper word would be extorted or extortion, because blackmail should be legal. Extortion should be prohibited by law. In both cases, there's a threat. Give me money or sexual services or something like that.
It was a typo.
Okay, well, let me just expand on this for the audience, because we are a libertarian audience and people might be interested in this. In both cases, there's a demand for something, money, sexual services, whatever it is. And in both cases, there's a threat. But the threat in the case of blackmail is to tell a secret. Like, I saw you taking a bath with a rubber ducky, and give me money or I'll tell everybody. Well, I saw you with my binoculars taking a bath with a rubber ducky, and I can engage in my free speech. So it would be legitimate to threaten that and demand money. On the other hand, extortion is something like, if you don't give me money, I'll shoot your kids. Now, that would be prohibited by law. So I'm glad it was just a typographical error or a glitch. No big deal. But since you mentioned it, I thought I would mention that too. So I am happily married, and my wife is the boss, except for these two minor details.
Okay, actually, on this next question that I was going to ask, we've almost covered it, but I'll ask it quickly anyway. Could we say each household should determine its own allocation of duties? If one gender is prepared to take on the role of child rearing, for instance, what business is it of the government to intervene and try and make the society more progressive? In other words, Walter, is feminism libertarian?
Oh no. Feminism is not libertarian. Feminism is very anti-libertarian. They say that men exploit women because men earn more money than women. For every dollar a man earns, a woman earns 70 cents, give or take. And they say that this is evil capitalism. But the facts of the matter are very different. The facts of the matter are that the reason for this is the marital institution. If you take all men and all women, the ratio is 70% or $7 to $10 or 70 cents for every dollar. But if you take ever married people who are widowed, divorced, separated, whatever, the ratio is not 70%, it's more like 40%. On the other hand, if you take never married, there is no gap. And whenever you do empirical research, you never get 1.0. In my own research, it goes from 90 to 110. Namely, sometimes women make 90 cents for every dollar. Sometimes they make $1.10 for every dollar that a man earns. It varies, but it's roughly no gap at all. Why is this? Because women who are married, and especially if they have kids, do the lion's share of the housekeeping and the cooking and the cleaning and certainly the breastfeeding. And whenever you do anything, you do it at the cost of not being able to do something else as well. My favorite example of this is Yo-Yo Ma, a world-class cellist, and Usain Bolt, a sprinter who did the 100 in about 9.3, which is, they should give him a speeding ticket for that. It was a world's record. And the point is, how good a cellist is Usain Bolt? Not very good. How good a 100-yard dash man is Yo-Yo Ma? Not very good. So whenever you do anything, you do it at the cost of not being able to do something else at all or as well. Well, if the woman is cooking and cleaning and watching out for kids, obviously she's not going to be able to do everything else as well, namely being in the market. The joke here is that the woman and the man, they both have a PhD in chemistry, and they both come home to work, and you know what the man says to the woman? "What's for dinner, dear?" Namely, she's doing the cooking, even though they both have the same PhD. And if she's going to have kids, she's going to act a little differently. And if she has 3 kids, and by the time she gets back into chemistry, he'll have more and he'll make more money than her. So feminists are saying that capitalism is evil because the women are exploited, but they're not. If they're never married, there's no gap. So this is, I'm not a big fan of feminists on the ground of libertarianism because they think that the free enterprise system is exploitative. It's not.
Okay. Roger?
Well, I look at feminism a lot the same way I look at Black Lives Matter. The feminists could have a slogan, "Female individuals matter." Well, of course they do. But so do male individuals, right? And yet, if we say that, oh, you're oppressive, white superiority or whatever, look at our culture. I mean, this is where I could go on an extended rant, but I'll try to restrain myself. The movies and TV shows portray men as clueless idiots or salivating sex fiends or whatever. And in the movies, the women are 110 pounds dripping wet, and they're pounding the life out of guys who are 2 or 3 times their size. And this is where our culture is now in regard to men. And you got DEI. We had a female vice president who her most profound statement was to be unburdened by what has been. And we've got a gal just brought into the Supreme Court who, at her confirmation hearing, she couldn't give a definition of what a woman is. And the only good thing about this DEI business, the checking boxes for being hired, is that they're not at home tormenting their children, which these ladies, I don't think either of them had any, and they're not they're not warping the minds of students. So there's something to be said for that, but not much. But I don't think it's the business of government to make America more progressive like this. I think reverse discrimination is more of a crime than you say it's not their business. No, I think it's a crime. There are libertarians who think feminism is fine because they've been oppressed and held down for decades. But as Walter said, the pay gap is partly imaginary, and when you sort it out sufficiently, you see that married people, men and women, have larger incomes than their counterparts, and unmarried men don't make any more than unmarried women or married women. So it has a lot more to do with what the corporations want somebody who's financially stable, and there's a lot of unmarried men who are still scuffling and haven't gotten their act together. So to go on though, I think that we need to have as level a playing field as possible in terms of whether the government keep the government out of it. We don't need to redress systemic sexism, blah blah blah. There shouldn't be any discrimination against women, but there shouldn't be any discrimination for them. Um, I don't think that there should be any role to mandate or incentivize or penalize or ban any kind of marital relationship. That's the sole business of the two people. How much time a parent spends with the kids, what chores they do, that they should work all this out, and there shouldn't be any kind of encouragement is or nudging. That's another. Who is it? Cass Sunstein talks about nudging people. Well, that's just government intervention with a velvet glove. We don't need this stuff. Parents and spouses should be free to arrive at whatever dividing up of duties and so on works best for them. And whatever the National Organization of Women feels about the matter is totally irrelevant as far as I'm concerned.
I'd just like to say a few words about discrimination.
Yep.
Male homosexuals are evil because they discriminate against half the human race in terms of love interests and bed partners.
I know.
Lesbians are evil because they also discriminate against half the human race in terms of bed partners and love interests. Male heterosexuals are also evil because we discriminate against half the human race in terms of bed partners and love interests, and the same thing for female heterosexuals. So we all have to be bisexual? That would be the implication. But even bisexuals discriminate. They discriminate on the basis of lookism, on the basis of a sense of humor, on the basis of, intelligence, on the basis of whatever that normal people discriminate on the basis of. Namely, we libertarians believe in a thing called free association. Anyone should be free to associate with anyone they want, mutually agreed upon, and nobody should be forced to associate with anyone that they don't want to. The problem with rape is that the rape victim doesn't want to associate with the rapist, and the problem with slavery is that the victim doesn't want to associate with the slave owner. So we libertarians, I think, believe that people should be free to discriminate all they want. However, when the government does it, it's doing it in our behalf or with our money. And I would say the government should not be able to discriminate on the basis of race or sex or gender or anything like that. And they do. They discriminate on the basis of race. They say, well, we have to have a professoriate at a public school that looks like America, and that we have to worry about the gap between white and black. Well, what about the basketball gap? There's a gigantic basketball gap between white and black. Should we spend money to make sure that whites can play basketball better, or maybe give black people weights so that when they run around on the basketball court, they can't jump as fast? Kurt Vonnegut wrote a beautiful piece, The Handicapper General. So this is what the DEI is all about, and I certainly agree with Roger, and I'm sure Vinay agrees too, that while private people should be able to discriminate to their heart's content, the government should not be able to do any of this.
Yeah, we're all agreed on this, so I'm going to jump on to a completely different issue now. Oh, by the way, Usain Bolt was 9:58 on the world record 100 meters. I think that's never been broken.
Wow.
But now we're going on to a completely different issue. Since the 1950s, birth rates across all societies have been declining. In Sudan, which is one of the poorest countries, in 1960, the birth rate was 7.01, then 6.99, and in 61 it was 7.01. Now it's around 4.1. And birth rates everywhere have been on a phenomenal decline. They say 2.1 is the right amount of children. I have had two, but I don't know how to get the 0.1. So I'm under the amount. But that's the sustainable population. But now we have North America, in continental terms, so USA, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand averaging as an aggregate 1.5, Australia, and the US is slightly above 1.6. And of the top 30 countries with the highest birth rates, only one, Afghanistan, is number 9. Everyone else is an African country. So don't tell me poverty or lack of housing or whatever is causing this, because something else, maybe pesticides, maybe feminism or inflation or rising individualism is the result of is the cause of that. So Walter, what would you do about it? One, if you're a libertarian and in government, but two, is there anything that is outside the scope of libertarianism or government, or Hungary is doing tax incentives for that matter? Would you do anything like that, or just leave it alone?
Well, what you're really broaching is what's called in economics optimal population size. And I would approach it from two grounds, one economic and the other libertarian. From the libertarian, it's very simple. The optimal population size is whatever people voluntarily have children. That's it. And hopefully there will be no wars or pestilence or anything like that. So the optimal population size for libertarianism is whatever exists. And if it's 2.1 is to keep the population level, and if you're at 1.5, you're going to have a decreasing population, fine. But whatever it is fine. But from an economic point of view, the question is, what population size will maximize per capita wealth? And this is a very difficult empirical issue. And I don't know the answer to it. Various economists have different views as to what the optimal population size is in order to maximize per capita wealth. And I really don't know. I haven't followed that. I don't really care about it. I just care about the libertarian optimal population, and that's whatever exists. So that would be the way I would approach that.
Okay, Roger?
Well, you gave quite a bit of statistics about how the trend is really widespread, and you were wondering about what possible factors were there. And I would say, well, we should be interested in the possible factors causing it insofar as it relates to libertarianism. Is there any way in which the government or any people are doing unlibertarian things that cause the population to go up or down or sideways or whatever? Well, obviously, inflation. That's well, the government spends way too much, and so they print money to finance it or borrow. And the inflation of the money supply then results in higher prices and higher costs of living. If the farmers and the factories don't keep up with production, then the prices are going to, there's more dollars chasing fewer goods, and so the prices go up. Too bad. And this discourages young couples from having children and delay starting their family. The buzzword we hear all the time now currently is affordability. And young people are having trouble. My younger daughter is getting married soon, and they're trying to decide, okay, are we going to have a child first, or are we going to try to buy a house first? Good luck, because times are really difficult, and both people have to work. Feminism, we've talked about feminism, that kind of relates to individualism. You said, well, maybe individualism is a factor. And I think there's a healthy trend. What Vinay and I wrote a book about self-actualization, about Aristotle and having your best life. And a lot of people think children are part of that, and other people think children just get in the way. Uh, I suppose I'm beating up Ayn Rand and the objectivists tonight. She and many of her followers, not all of them, look at children that way. The top 5 leaders of the movement have had a sum total of 1 child and 2 grandchildren, and that one doesn't appear to be working out too well right now. That's not a shining example for young people who read her novels and think, hey, this is a great philosophy, but hey, wait a minute, why aren't they having kids? And what guidance do I have for having a family life and and a marriage when the heroine of one novel is getting it on with three different guys, and the heroine of another novel is getting it on with three different guys, and then the heroine in another novel, she gets it on with two guys, and then she ends up shot to death out in the tundra, So wait a minute, I'm not getting much guidance here, except those women look like they're having some fun. So and where do the new objectivists come from? Well, the same shopping mall that the existentialists and the Marxists get their followers from, and from the colleges. So most of the objectivists aren't having second generation objectivists. If they have kids at all, their kids go off some other direction. And then, well, okay, I guess we have to go recruit kids at the colleges, and that's fine. But unless a young person thinks they can really have it all, they're going to lean in the direction their leaders have gone. And in the case of the objectivists, toward career, away from families. And I know they've been trying to address this in more recent years, to have young mothers who are also objectivists speak at their conferences and say, well, here's how you can do it. But it's kind of late to the party, when you've gone 40, 50 years with almost nothing said about it, and you wonder, what's wrong with this picture? The other thing I'll mention is the poison in the environment, the food chain, and the healthcare sector. I call them the three Ps. We got plastics and pesticides and pollution. And all of those things affect fertility or infant mortality or miscarriages or birth defects. And even vaccines have been linked with those kind of effects. And the government has kind of covered up those risks, and even pushing people in their childbearing years to take vaccines that they maybe don't need and that might hurt their chances to have a family. Well, I think Operation Warp Speed's finally starting to get some scrutiny, and that's good. So maybe our years of being oppressed by the health industrial complex are gonna be come to an end. Rights are violated by those various poisons, and greater liability on those that are not taking care of keeping those poisons out of the food chain, the water supply, and so on. They're going to have to pay the piper and maybe be brought to court. But I think that'd be a good thing for courts and regulatory agencies to look at, instead of trying to protect the snail darters and obscure species of ferns.
I'd like to add
Okay.
one more thing to the litany that Roger mentioned, and that is feminism.
Yeah.
Before feminism, a lot of women wanted to get married and have kids.
Yeah.
Feminism is teaching that marriage is a trap and you'll be exploited, and don't get married. And there are a lot of women now in their 50s and 60s who are very unhappy that they don't have children because they swallowed this poison of feminism. Do I say that feminism should be prohibited by law? No. I don't go that far, but I'm not a fan of feminism. And as long as Roger is mentioning 4 or 5 or 6 very important issues as to why we have fewer people than we otherwise would, we have to include feminism on that list as well.
Oh,
Okay,
and I want to toss into this too. There's another thing they talk about. Another buzzword or phrase is work-life balance, and they try to help people to balance their home life and their careers. And the result of this usually is to push men away from the workplace toward the home, and to pull women away from the home toward the workplace. Now, that also tends to have an effect on people's desires to have more kids, because if men are nudged into spending more time as a house husband, they get a really strong reality check how much work it is to raise kids and do the housework. And when women are pushed to pursue external careers, they're encouraged to hang in there and ignore their biological clocks, which are saying, you really do want to have a baby, don't you? And she said, no, not that. I've got a career. So pregnancy is going to, of course, interfere with that. So all of this work-life balance, and the women get out there and the men come in here, I think that has a dampening effect. And so if government would just get out of the way, and if people would just stop trying to mold society and just let people make their own individual decisions, I think things would seek their own level, and it would be whatever it is, it'd be just fine.
Okay, let me just add two things here. One, this we wrote in Modernizing Aristotle's Ethics, and I did the research on this. And there is no such thing as a biological clock inherently,
Oh,
although a lot of women do feel it. So there is a cultural pressure, because one of the things the Almighty God or nature did was to separate the sex act from having children, in the sense that all mammals were given a sexual urge, but with human beings, they were able to use contraception and they were able to use a pill, and they were able to divide those two up completely. So you have a separate decision in each sphere, whether to have protected sex, unprotected sex, or no sex. But meanwhile, the children decision was, in your hands rather than out of your hands. There's another trend, a very big one, two big ones that I didn't speak about. In the United States, the difference between the religious people having children and the irreligious people having children, there was always a gap. But that gap has been widening and widening and widening. And the religious people are still about 2.1, and the irreligious people are not. So you might
yeah.
think that will solve itself, right? So the religious people will multiply and the irreligious people won't. And in the end, everything will be fine. But no, there is another trend. And that trend is a trend towards giving up on religion and not necessarily joining another religion. And that trend is the biggest trend. And that's why we have an overall declining rate, which, as you said, you can solve with immigration. So, but there
What?
is
What?
another point. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
There is another point which I want to turn to Walt to. Are those who have children, if you have a small society, are those who have children doing society as a whole a favor because they are de-aging society? And you can't have firefighters and police force and military people who are 65 or 75 or 85. You need some nice pyramid there, and they're de-aging society. Do you accept that? If your answer is yes, how would you compensate those who de-age society, or it'll just work itself out?
Who should speak now?
Walter.
Oh, you.
My turn. Well, I I return to what I said about optimal population from a libertarian point of view and from an economic point of view.
Yep.
But what you're really getting at when you say, are they doing people a favor and then should they be compensated for this, is what's called in economics externalities. And externalities are something that the mainstream believes in fervently and supports government activity on the basis of, whereas Austrian economists don't go along with that. For example, Milton Friedman says we ought to have more schooling than the market produces. Why? Because people go to school just to have for their own benefit, to make more money, to meet a better spouse, whatever. But when they become more educated, they do everybody else a favor by being more intelligent, more educated, and they'll vote better and there'll be less criminals and all that. And therefore, we should take money from those people who are benefited and give it to people who are going to school. So here's a woman in her 70s. And she's got no children and no grandchildren, and she has to pay to support other people's children because she's supposedly benefiting from it. Well, in libertarianism, nobody gets to pay. Nobody is forced to pay for benefits. Look, I'm now smiling at you. See, great smile, and I'm now charging you $10 each for that smile. Look, I benefited you. I smiled at you. Give me $10 each. Well,
it's worth it.
Don't ruin my example. But the point is that if I billed you for it and then you didn't pay it and I sued you, I'd be a Milton Friedmanite, or I'd be a semi-socialist economist like Milton Friedman, not an Austrian. So the idea that I have a child and I benefit you guys, or you have a child and you benefit me, and therefore we have to pay each other for the other guy having children, is a non-starter for libertarians. Now, it might benefit people. Look, Murray Rothbard used to say, what is it? Civilization is the best external economy or the best neighborhood effect, to put it in Milton Friedman's terms. We all benefit from having society. But you can't build people unless they agree to be paid, unless they agree to pay. And if you start billing people, namely taxing them to encourage other people to have children because we need more children, well, now you're not in libertarian land anymore.
Okay. I'm going to turn to Roger at a couple of small things as I do. And this is kind of the last question of the day, but I'll give Walter a final minute or two.
Well, I want to talk about what Walter just talked about.
Sorry, I'm coming to that, but it's a combine. I did combine two questions, so they're both now directed at you.
All right.
But I'm just going to add a couple of things. One, the United States says the mandatory retirement age for air traffic controllers is 56, which is a bloody low age, given that a lot of men are living up to 86 or more.
Sure.
And secondly, I mean, I heard Charlie Kirk say once that, if you want purpose in your life, you should have not only a lot of children, but more children than you can afford. And I'll leave it. May his soul rest in peace. That whole murder was horrendous. But this is your question. Do you agree with Charlie? Do you agree with Walter on all these issues of birth rates and not having enough young people for the fire brigade and so on?
Well, I don't know if I agree with Charlie, but that's pretty much what I did. I had 4 children of my own and 3 bonus children, and some people I know I'm suspected of being an evangelical Christian or something, but I'm just a guy who loves children. Um, you asked a very important question, though, like when the society gets older, who's going to go be the policemen and the people in the army, and who's going to work on the oil rigs and all this highly risky stuff that young, strong people, men mostly, but some women, I wouldn't worry too much about that. We're talking about during the next 10 years or so, artificial intelligence and robots are going to take on more and more dangerous physical tasks like this. So I don't think the demographics are going to be an issue before a tax incentive for having children would produce young adults, which would be 20 years from now. So the only other reason I can think of is to make more little wage earners and taxpayers, and I don't think that's the direction we want to go, really. From a moral standpoint, I'm all for people getting to keep more of the money they earned, even if it's only some of the people who be eligible to do so, like people who have children. My favorite example is if Al Capone steals $1,000 from me and a lot of other people, and then he looks at me and he says, "Roger, I like you, and I will give you back $500 of that from my unspent hoard of stolen money." Well, if I accept this money, I'm not hurting anybody else any more than if he had simply given everybody a prorated share of what was left instead of giving $500 to me. But I don't like this idea of incentivizing people. I'm putting air quotes around it for people listening, to give them back some of their tax money in return for doing something the government likes for them to do. It sounds too much like crony capitalism. I would call it crony familyism. Sure, sure. Everybody benefits, just like in the argument about education benefits everybody. But the benefit doesn't show up for 20 years. And in the meantime, only certain people are really benefiting, and that's the ones who are cranking out all these kids. So the only good thing about tax incentives is it's not a mandate. A mandate to have kids would be literally slave labor in both senses of the term. Your labor is you have to do it, but it's still the same problem: the preferential treatment for some people, picking winners and losers. Well, no kids, you lose all your tax dollars. Sorry. Cronyism like this may not be the worst way to run a country and a government, but it's going to cause envy and resentment. I remember all too well 50, 60 years ago during the Vietnam War, the guys who got deferments for medical reasons or to go to college, other people really shun you. They looked at you like, man, you had a fake medical deferment, did you? That heel spur wasn't for real. People don't like selective slavery too well when they're on the receiving end. And I think capitalism, the same deal. It's provided many benefits, but it's gotten a black eye, deservedly, from the cronyism and the tax privileges and subsidies. I think the same thing would happen to families who dipped into the tax pool for having more kids. So I really think there's lots of reasons not to do that. Libertarian reasons and just human psychology. It's just not a good idea.
Thank you. Okay, we're almost at the end of the show, but I'll let you two have one last comment on everything, but a short one. Walter.
I feel I've been on a roller coaster with you guys, and we've covered everything from soup to nuts. And it's been a magnificent experience, and I made 2 new friends, and I'm just delighted that you invited me to be part of this. This was a magnificent thing, and I'm glad that a lot of people will see it, and maybe we'll get a book out of this afterward. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for including me in this wonderful adventure.
Back at you.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, Roger was part of that too, of being a host and the finest transcript editor, because AI's transcripts can be very, very bad, but they are very good by the time they leave Roger's hands. So thank you both for participating in the series and contributing both as hosts and as guests. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in. That is what is going to make you more savvy, and stay safe. Good night and good luck.
Take care. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.